Paradigm, CEO. Welcome. This is the first time 51 Capital's done an interview with an investment or a company that we're interested in. So thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Well, thank you, Scott. It's a great pleasure to be with you and 51 Capital.
I think, I've been requested, a lot to do something like this. We obviously talk quite a lot, being having a long relationship. It's about 3 years now since we made our first investment. Been with the company and knowing you and obviously had a long-term relationship with the investment as well, and obviously with the company. So we'd like to think that we understand it quite well. And so obviously a lot of people were interested in us sort of sitting down with you and talking through it. So I really thank you for doing that. And I'm sure our investors are looking forward to hearing sort of our thoughts and breakdown of the company as we've written about previously. I guess we'll hit it off with a few things. So obviously Paul and I both own shares in Paradigm. So we are talking the book and, both very large, shareholders, and have put a lot on the line there. Our background, in our fund, we tend to look for these asymmetric investment opportunities. And that we identified with Paradigm around 3 years ago when the company was, around 30 odd cents a share. Market cap was quite small, and Paul was looking for, some institutional support. And we looked at the opportunity, reviewed the risks, and thought it was very skewed to the upside and in our favour. Had a good management team, great product, and the more we learned, the more we liked the stock. So we obviously, at the time, we'd done in our fund, we do a thing called positive activism. We change the model on its head and try and focus on working with good companies and sharing our research and story outside of just being for our fund investors and our detailed, research process that goes along with that. And we worked closely with the company for about 18 months, Paul. And then, the company's moved on into bigger, arraignment than what we could service. And we like to think that we've helped on the journey and will continue to be supportive shareholders over that period. So one other thing with our fund, the holding actually got so large in Paradigm, we spun it off into a separate class of units, just so we didn't have to sell down that position. So we are long-term holders, long-term believers of the stock myself. I've put a lot of capital behind the team and Paul and the company. And as I said, have a long-term vision. So very much looking forward to sitting down and sharing some of those thoughts with our investors and also other people that might be interested in that. So thanks again, Paul. So Paul, there's a lot of things happening, at the company, and 2020 was a bit of a, tumultuous year in terms of COVID slowing things down, for the biotech industry as a whole, as everyone accelerated efforts to focus on COVID vaccines and developing, things to help that, and as well as journals, focusing on COVID, FDA regulators, and just the timeline slowdown. This year now has changed a lot of things in that the hard yards of 2020 are behind us. 2021 looks absolutely rammed with catalysts, and we feel like the stock's consolidated nicely and just looking for that next sort of, valuation re-rate on the back of hopefully some positive news. Where are things at with the main story being osteoarthritis? Where's things at with the IND filing, and just what exactly is that going to mean for the company going forward? Maybe let's start there.
Yeah, thanks very much, Scott. And it is good to catch up after such a long time, and we do appreciate your long-term holding in Paradigm. You have been a great supporter and provided ongoing coverage, which we greatly appreciate. In terms of this year, yes, you're absolutely right. Calendar year 2021 is incredibly exciting for Paradigm, and our lead program with the use of penazam polysulfate sodium, which is a drug which we source from BioPharmaceuticals in Germany. We have trademarked that as xylosol. So xylosol is planned to go into a phase 3 clinical program, which comprises a pivotal study with one confirmatory study. But before we can start any studies in the United States, we need to go through the process of filing an investigational new drug application with the US FDA. So the US FDA have a very well-structured process that sponsors of clinical trials must adhere to. And the primary objective of the FDA is to make sure that the citizens in the United States are being delivered with a drug that has well understood safety profile and also evidence to show that it could alleviate the condition for which it's being proposed to be used. So in our case, for treatment with people with osteoarthritis. And the IND process is an extremely thorough and detailed process. It looks at three broad areas. One is it looks at the manufacturing of the product and how can you, as a sponsor, convince the FDA that the product is being produced consistently. So do you have batch to batch consistency, and how can you continue to demonstrate the purity and the consistency of the product? So that's a very big section that the FDA looks at, and that's generally known as the CMC section. They also have another section which looks at the animal pharmacology and toxicology. This is where the FDA want to have a look at all of the animal studies that have been conducted over the years, and again looking primarily at seeing that the drug is safe and it hasn't had many adverse effects in animals, but also the toxicology studies really stress the drug, putting the high doses into animals and looking for effects and things like that. But that's a very big part of the IND submission. And of course, the final part is the clinical protocols and information for the investigators, the doctors who are going to administer the drug. So basically saying to the FDA, this is the protocol, this is how we're going to treat the subjects, not only from administration of the drug point of view, but this is our safety process. So if there was an adverse event, this is what happens. This is how we treat every safety issue. This is how we recommend the physicians treat the patients, and all this type of information is all compiled into one massive document of several thousand pages in length. And to answer your question, where are we at? Well, I'm very pleased to report that we, from Paradigm's perspective, we have compiled all of this information, and it has been sent to our consultant in the United States for publishing. And publishing is a very extensive process where every piece of data from all of the studies is easily referenced by any of the FDA staff who want to look deep into the dossier. They can find the data quite easily. If there are any cited papers, they have to be hot linked so that people can just click on those, bring up the whole paper. It's a very involved and complicated process, but it's basically putting the documents and the tables into formats of type that the FDA is comfortable with and requires certain formats. So it's not just a matter of submitting it into a Word document. It has to go into a specific software program so that it's all compliant with the FDA requirements.
And I guess the company's had a lot of discussions with the regulator, before submitting this document to try and mitigate the risks. Maybe talk us through some of the things that they had provided feedback on and how they were addressed, and just, I guess, the level of confidence of them being happy with this, very large document that it's going to be correct, because obviously, we don't want to go back and have to do it again. So do it once, do it right. I think it's been the mantra the whole way through. So, any feedback on what the company's done to address any of the, I guess, specific requirements or concerns from the FDA?
Sure. So I'll just finish off on that FDA question. Just to let everyone know that the IND document is very close to finalisation, and it is going to be filed with the US FDA this month. And so we will have met that timeline of a submission to the FDA for the IND document in Q1 2021. So we are on track, and everything is currently moving forward to meet that timeline. So as you know, Scott, we're very focused on meeting our timelines, and it's been a huge amount of effort by a lot of people within the company, and I'd like to thank them all very much for their help and support to get us to this point. But in terms of our approach, the very positive thing that I can report on is that we have very experienced consultants, and we have very experienced staff. When we interact with the agency, we make sure that we understand their questions, and we double check and we confirm in meeting minutes that we understand the issue that they've raised. And we then go about, as you say, do it right, get it done right the first time. And what we have done, and I'll give you just one example, just one example of many different aspects that the agency spoke to us about. And one of the examples, and as I say, I just want to stress it's one of a number, so it's not saying that this is the only thing that we've done in the last 12 months, but it's one example. So when we were talking to the agency, they noted that our document that we submitted for the pharmacokinetic study, so this is under the previous human study section, we, for logistical reasons at the time, undertook our first pharmacokinetic study in Japan, and that was all male Japanese subjects. And the pharmacokinetic profile of the drug was well understood at that time. The agency said, going forward, for your new drug application, the company would almost certainly require a PK study to be complete in a Western population. So we discussed with them some of the feedback that we had from our pharmacologist, and they said that they understood our position, but they felt that it was still a requirement of the sponsor to have a pharmacokinetic study that was on a Western population. So what we did was, with this one example, we then gathered the troops, we discussed it, and we undertook a pharmacokinetic study in a Western population. It was done in Australia, and we focused on answering a couple of questions that the agency raised as to why there would be potential differences between our pharmacokinetic study and the study population that we evaluated in our PK study. And one was the difference in sex, that the Japanese study focused on males. Osteoarthritis can affect a higher proportion of females. So we made sure that we had a higher proportion of females in our study. And we also had a proportion of females over the age of 60, being representative of the type of patient that ultimately will be treated with the drug by physicians once the product is registered. So we have undertaken that work, and we have prepared all of that, written it all up, and submitted it as part of our IND application. And the point we want to make to the agency is that we heard your concerns about this, and we have tried to work with the agency, and we have delivered a Western PK study within the period of our pre-IND meeting up to the period of our IND submission. And I think that should give us a lot of confidence in going forward, because we have done that with all of the aspects that the agency raised. As I said, the PK study is one example where we have gone back.
Talking back, or thinking back to around the first feedback from the FDA, one of the other points was the BeNe pharma product, which it had to be specifically BeNe, which was like they are the only FDA approved supplier of PPS. So, and I believe that was another thing you had to go back and show that all the data being submitted was the product. So it is exactly the same as what is on the FDA file, to exactly the same product as what Paradigm is submitting in this IND. Is that also correct?
That's correct, Scott. Yeah. So with the actual API, the agency made it very clear that there was only one API manufacturer that they had approved and had a good understanding of the drug, and that was the BeNe product. And we explained that we had only ever used the BeNe product in all of our preclinical and clinical development. And so again, in terms of thoroughness, we provided them with a list of all the studies that we undertook, and then the batches of the BeNe product that was used in those studies. And we also provided some of the specifications of the final release of those batches to show the consistency from batch to batch. So again, it's this sort of detail that's required for a good interaction with the agency, that you're showing them that you're quite well prepared in terms of information, but you're also quite prepared to share that information with the agency, and if they require more, go out and generate the data in a properly validated facility, so that they feel comfortable that you're doing your utmost to make sure that you're answering their concerns or their questions.
Yeah, and that, I mean, after that initial feedback, I think the FDA specifically wanting the BenA product showed, just how much of a moat the company had around, that supply agreement and dealing with BenA Pharma exclusively for this. And it was something that you and I had discussed, years prior to that. And I think that confidence grew when we saw that feedback. So, very, very exciting. I guess with the IND now, imminently being submitted, what are the next steps for the company once it's filed? I'm assuming we're just going to put the feet on the desk and sit back and relax. But what's sort of the next steps and process there? Once they've got the document, I believe it's around a month until you can hear back from them, and hopefully it's accepted. So yeah, maybe just talk through what that looks like, and then the design and when that sort of stuff will start.
You're right, Scott. So the agency has a statutory obligation to the sponsor to ask any questions within a 30 working day period. So it means that if there are no questions, or the agency doesn't ask you to hold off any further development until these questions are answered, then the sponsor is free to proceed with the rollout of the clinical study. But you can't do that until you have 30-day clearance or an official notification from the agency to say, yes, you're cleared to conduct the study. But ultimately you receive an IND number, and that's your reference that you can then ship the product around the United States for clinical trial use. The work has already commenced on the phase 3 trial. So you're absolutely right. There's no putting the feet up on the desk and thinking, well, that's it. We have a team of people who are currently running around in the United States, talking to various centres, expressing their interest in participating in a phase 3 trial in osteoarthritis. Osteoarthritis is a huge market. It's as far as clinicians are concerned, they are highly excited with any new agent that might represent, non-opioid relief for patients. But also, when we talk about Pentazam, we also talk about the potential that we've seen thus far in its ability to probably slow down the disease or maybe even stop it. And so therefore, investigators are wildly excited, and every site that we visited so far, which is over 75 sites, have all actually said that they want to participate. So the work that's going on at the moment is people going around to the clinical trial sites, assessing their ability to conduct the clinical trial in accordance with the protocol, making sure they have all the necessary infrastructure in place. And then once those sites have been qualified, once the IND is cleared, we go back to them with a clinical trial agreement, and they sign up, and then they can start screening and recruiting patients into the clinical trial. So a lot of work is already ongoing, which is why we've seen an increase in our spend, because we're not expecting that we're going to have much delay. I'm not suggesting that we will get IND approval. I'm just saying I think we've prepared well enough that we don't expect that we're going to go on extensive hold. But assuming that we go through the IND process smoothly, we want to get on to the next phase, which is treating subjects under the clinical trial protocol as soon as possible.
And what's the first part of the trial? So it's broken down into about 3 odd parts, and then you're going to do Europe as a confirmatory study. What's sort of the high level overview of the design of the trial, and how will it kick off?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Scott, because that's a key message that we want to get across to all of your listeners, is that a lot of time and effort has gone into the strategy of the clinical trial. It's not just a matter of saying, okay, let's just do a trial and see where we land. It's very important to have the new drug application, the registration, top of mind when you're doing your phase 3 trial. So if the trial is successful, you can then move on to registration without having to have further delays and cost of having to do further studies. So in terms of our strategy, the agency asked us, what is the minimally effective dose? And they showed us some of the studies that had been done elsewhere with pentazan showing that there had been an effect at a lower dose. And we explained to them how we had investigated a number of doses throughout our process before we went into the special access scheme. And then we settled on 2 milligrams per kilogram twice a week for 6 weeks. And they said, well, they'd like to see us demonstrate that that is the minimally effective dose. So the first stage of the phase 3 trial is 4 groups of subjects plus placebo. Sorry, four groups in total. So there's 3 receiving various doses and then placebo. So we're trying to determine which is the minimally effective dose. And then that part of the trial, once that's finished and we have our effective dose determined, we're then in a position to proceed on with the recruitment of subjects into 002, which is the pivotal clinical trial. So it's an adaptive design.
In the dosing study, we're not doing anything above what we've already done. So it's only going to be lower doses. Is that right?
Yes. Yes. So it'll be our standard 2 milligrams per kilogram twice a week, and then 2 milligrams per kilogram once a week, and then a third dose. But all of these will be lower than our current dose of drug.
So unlike the anti-NGF products, we haven't seen adverse events even at the 2 milligram per kilo per kilogram twice a week dose range. We haven't seen serious adverse events. So we're not expecting that lower doses or the existing dose would serve any major safety concerns for the company.
No, not at all. I mean, we have tested all of these doses and much higher doses in the animal toxicology studies. So we know that we are well within our what's known as the NOEL limit, which is the no observable adverse events in animals. So we are a fraction of that level at 2 milligrams per kilogram twice a week for 6 weeks. So we don't anticipate that the lower doses will demonstrate any major difference in safety. And we do expect that the lower doses may not have the same efficacy, but we have to test it, Scott, and that's the whole point. If 2 milligrams per kilogram once a week works, then that's a very good outcome for the company, because it means we automatically just half our cost of goods.
Yeah, no, and look, I mean, if that came in at the same level, that would be phenomenal in terms of the economics for it. So that would be very exciting.
Yes,
my gut feel is the standard one that we've gone with is probably going to work when you look at the prior studies and efficacy reached. So, but it needs to be done. So let's see what the results will be. Once that dosing is known, maybe just talk to so people get a clear understanding. Once that's finished, who determines what the dose is? How does that then work? And then how does it roll into the next part of the trial?
Yes, well, ultimately it's the sponsor that determines the dose, because the sponsor has written a very strict protocol for the Data Safety Monitoring Committee to compare the doses. They can't just say, oh, I like dose 1, what do you like? And someone, oh, I like dose 2. It's not a subjective assessment. It's actually hard data comparing the level of adverse events in one dose with the other, the efficacy in one versus the other. And that protocol has been prepared and written by the company, and the DSMB in a blinded way review all of the data and then advise the sponsor back, this is your dose to go forward with. We take that dose and then we proceed on with the clinical trial.
Yeah, you won't, the results of that, just to be clear, will not be released to the market. They won't as a investor or a patient in the study, they wouldn't know the efficacy of the dosing compared one dose to the other?
No, we won't be releasing that, but that will be part of the data that we're collecting. And the idea behind that is that, we don't want to bias the participants in the pivotal study. So we keep that.
And those patients then can also be used in the data pack and submission to the IND to, in a statistical analysis to show the effect of those dose or of the cohort that's receiving the dose in the next part of the study. Is that right?
Yeah. So I mean, all of the clinical data is important for the agency. Some of it is important from an exposure point of view. How many people have been exposed to the drug? What adverse event percentage did we see from 1,000 or so subjects? Those types of things. But in terms of the dosing study will complete, and then we'll have a follow-on study. So 002 is our pivotal study, and then the follow-on study is 006. And in 006, it's people who were on placebo in the first arm, although they don't know it. They just get offered the opportunity to go into 006 and then be treated with the selected dose. And also any subjects who were on a lower dose similarly get the opportunity to go into that 006 study, and they too get treated with the selected dose. And also people who were treated with the selected dose and had a good response, they go into 006 and they get retreated when they believe the effect of the drug has worn off. So we're doing a number of different things in 006. So we're taking all of those people who got placebo and treating them. We're taking people who got the lower dose and treating them and generating data in a controlled setting. And then we're also taking the people who did have a response in the dosing arm and then retreat them. So we're getting retreatment data. So we're gathering exposure and retreatment data all the way through the process and using those subjects in a follow-on study.
Yeah. And obviously, the company's thought about why these things are important in terms of the feedback and I guess economics of the product. Just talk us through what's the rationale behind, I guess, getting and collecting more data to sort of improve the value of the asset as opposed to just trying to do the bare minimum, and just get through on a single study. Okay, we can go and file the IND now and just crack on with that. What's the thought process behind, I guess, the 006, as you mentioned, and I want to touch on the 008 study soon. What's the thought process behind all that, and how's the company come to, I guess, designing those studies, now going to run those studies? What's sort of the thoughts behind that?
Sure. So if you have a view on the registration of the product, assuming you go through and demonstrate the product is safe and efficacious and statistically significant over the placebo, and you pass your phase 3 study, you go on to registration. But when you go on to registration, you have a meeting with the agency and you sit down and you try and decide what is the depth and breadth of your label. So the label really gives the prescribing physicians the information that they require to go ahead and start using this product. But also you need to think of beyond registration, which is how are you going to really penetrate into that market? We talk about penetration rates of 5%, 10%, 50%, and so on. So how do you penetrate that market? So with a view to the future, you can get all of that information now in a phase 3 adaptive design and really maximize the investment, your return on investment that you're making in your phase 3 trial. If you don't do it, what it means is you get a very restricted label and you don't have the necessary information to share with the physicians as to why your drug is better than what's on the market at the moment. So these adaptive designs are designed specifically for getting the information to maximize the penetration rate into the market once the product is registered, or to get the best possible label when you're meeting with the agency, because the agency will say, okay, well, you passed your phase 3 study. One of the things that we have to talk about is how often do you retreat patients? We need to put some information into the label about how often do you use this drug. So, you know, the agency wants to be able to say, you know, you take this drug 1 course per year, which would be ideal for us. And then the agency then will say, where's your data to support that? So then you say, okay, well, 002 and 003 was our pivotal and our confirmatory study, but 006 actually took patients who had been treated and they didn't come back and ask for any retreatment for a period of 12 months. Then they were retreated and we followed them out for another period of time. So that's the sort of information that you get that may not be immediately obvious now, but if you gather it as you're doing your trials, it becomes hugely valuable when you sit down at the end of the trial and meet with the agency to talk about the new drug application, which is the same, going back to my earlier example of having Western PK data. You know, they say, well, look, you know, you showed it worked well in a Japanese cohort, but Western PK data, and we can say, well, we submitted that as part of our IND submission. It's already there. You know,
I guess, you know, and showing a longer term effect, you know, and better than, I guess, other things that are on the market. We've obviously learned so much about that in the real world evidence in the SAS program in Australia. Obviously yourself being a recipient of it over many years, you know, maybe just talk to what's the company already know about the product and the retreatment cycles and what you've learned and how those things were then incorporated into designing this. And I guess what other options patients really have on the market right now. I mean, you know, we look at penetration rates ourselves in our modelling, and we think, you know, and in talking to people that have used the product, and I'd like to think we've spoken to one of them, probably, you know, the largest number of people outside of the company and introduced and no others that we've put onto the product. The feedback that they've had, you know, I've had back surgery, I've understand being in pain and just the lengths you go to get out of that pain. And just, you know, how this product might penetrate. We have our own views and think it's going to be far more so just based on, you know, real world conversations that we have. You know, what has the company learned from those sort of studies that you've done that are not clinical settings, and what do you think, you know, will be the outcomes of this?
So I think the first thing, Scott, that you touched on, which I think is very, very important, is if people say, you know, a person is not going to go back to their doctor for two injections a week for 6 weeks, I would argue that that person has never had chronic pain. Because unless you've had a period in your life where you've had chronic pain, you will do almost anything to get
I think
relief.
I was going to my physio, chiro doctor about 7 times a week when I had my back injury.
Yeah.
I was going every day, twice a day sometimes, to different people.
Yeah. So we've had examples of, I remember one gentleman who told me that he lived in the country and his was referred to a centre in the city, and he travelled 3 hours by train to get into the city and spend an hour at the clinic, you know, waiting and then getting treated and then heading home, and 3 hours back on the train home. And he said the first few weeks he was wondering, you know, if it was all worth it. And then about the 4th week, he said, I woke up and I was walking down the train platform and I thought, I'm not in any pain. And he couldn't wait to get to see the doctor. So I think people who talk of these things sometimes may not understand the plight of a person with chronic pain. And that's something that we've learned, that the people will go to extreme lengths to do whatever it takes to try and avoid that pain. And that's unfortunately one of the drivers as to why a lot of people are taking opioids, because if you can disassociate yourself from the pain for a while, it's a great relief.
Well, Paul, you've gone the furthest of anyone. You went off and set up a whole company to try and do the whole thing and help everybody else.
Yes, well, you know my story, Scott. I mean, used to be very active in my younger years, and I did have some injuries along that journey. And getting older, I was involved in an accident and had a very large bone lesion. And my doctor said the prognosis was not great. And with the established osteoarthritis in my knee, I'd probably be looking at a joint replacement. And made me think, you know, why do we hear stories of people with their dogs go in to see a vet, get treated with Pentazan, and within weeks they're reporting that their dogs are like puppies, running around, jumping up and down and doing things that they haven't done for the previous 12 months? How is it that something like that is available, but it's not available for humans? Because, you know, we're in the same situation as the dogs. I mean, I'm an old dog. I can't run and jump and do the things that I used to do, but I was in a lot of pain and I didn't want to have an artificial joint like a lot of people.
So Paul,
I spoke.
couldn't you just go into the vet and ask him to give you a shot?
Well, you could, and maybe get a flea treatment while you're there. But the issue is these days, Scott, because Pentazan is so of a successful product in the veterinary industry, it has seen a number of products that are claimed to be Pentazan coming from India and China that the vets now use because it's lower priced than the original Pentazan. And they are not as well controlled as the human product, and therefore the safety profile is very different. So it wouldn't be advisable for people to go along to the vet and get a veterinary product. They're not.
I don't think the vet would be overly keen to, jab a 60-year-old male sitting on the table with a vet grade product either. I don't think that person would have a license if anything went wrong.
No, and I mean, so just following that scenario through, if the person then starts to say, well, I'm feeling feverish and I'm not feeling well, what do? You go along and you tell the hospital that you've been treated by your vet, and then the authorities come knocking, and that vet probably has his license revoked because they're not allowed to treat humans. I mean, they're treating animals, and that's what their license and their whole profession is. So it would be a very risky move. But just coming back to the point of Pentazan, we do know that the agency is aware of these other what we call Pentazan-like products, or what they're called to be Pentazan. And the agency told us that with these products, there's no real evidence to suggest that they are consistent from batch to batch, which is a huge concern. As I said, the IND is about how do you demonstrate.
And I wrote about that after the trip to visit Benno. And we discussed the different molecular structures of the different products. And there's a paper written about, these other imitation ones and just how the batch varies so much that they can't class it as the actual PPS, just due to the manufacturing difficulties in actually.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what Benno pride themselves on. And Benno have also worked with the agency to put a monograph, which is like a chemical fingerprint, on file. And if someone comes along and says, look, I've got Pentazan, they ask for this comparison. And if the fingerprint is not identical, the agency doesn't want to go down the path of approving that, because they don't know the full extent of the safety and efficacy of a different combination of molecules.
Yeah, I think, and talking about the treatment regimes and just trying to work out how long it lasts and people doing it, I think one of the other things that we've heard of, and you and I touched on, like people will go out of their way to get 2 treatments a week, but the longer term vision for the company is obviously not to have the requirement of people to go to a physician to get the product. Now, auto injectors are obviously, widely available. When my wife was pregnant with our first baby, she had to take Clexane, diabetes. There's a number of these people that take these injectable pens home and self-administer. It's not a deep vein sort of injection. It's, as Pentazan into the subcutaneous fat. How will the company look to, I guess, make it more commercially available for people in the future? And what's just sort of the process of using, say, a widely accepted pen? What are the regulators sort of, I guess, views on that? And is the drug able to be stored safely and easily? What's sort of the economics behind that? And I guess timing before people might not need to visit their doctors to actually, receive treatment.
Yeah, you're right, Scott. Ultimately, patient convenience is a great way of increasing patient compliance. So we recognise that going forward, once it's a commercial product, it's most likely not going to be in the format that it is today, because we appreciate not everyone's going to want to go to the doctor twice a week, even though they might be in chronic pain. So make it as convenient as possible. And so we have a team within Paradigm led by Jeannie Jochen, who's our Chief Operating Officer. She is working with a commercial team to source a already FDA approved device, which be an auto injector. There's many on the market at the moment, as you say. We know rheumatoid arthritis therapy now, virtually all of the anti-TNF therapies are in auto injectors for that exact reason. Chronic conditions require constant administration of the drug. So therefore, making it easy to administer is a goal of ours. So we're working with an approved FDA device, and then it's incumbent on us to demonstrate that our product is compatible with that device. So we'll have to do some studies, which we can do later this year, early next year, showing that our product is compatible with the device itself, to make sure that there's no leaching of any of the components into our product and it's still very stable and all that type of thing. So they're all of the sorts of studies that the agency will require, because that'll be a combination of the device and our drug. But we think that we've already done stability studies with our drug in the containers that we currently have, and that glass can be adapted to an auto injector. So we already have a lot of stability on the stability of our product in that glass with that stopper and things like that. So again, if you build the business with the long-term view in mind, you can often save investors a lot of time and a lot of money by being able to move through this incredibly complex field of pharmaceutical development as quickly as possible. There's no shortcuts, is what I'm saying. I mean, and there's no real advantage in saying, oh, well, we will fight with the agency. We'll go and have a type A meeting, which is, dispute resolution, and go to the agency and fight with them and say that, Japanese people will produce the same result as the Westerns, which is what our data showed anyway. But until you've got that data, you don't know. So you can fight with the agency, but
By fighting with your wife, Paul, there's no upside. No, and I think, and I talk to people, you being the largest shareholder and have obviously built the business and put it all on the line, and, went from having just a sore knee to and no solution to building the whole thing. I very much trust the judgment, and it's, those people that have, things on the line and have built it up, that we like to, put our capital and trust it with, to do things right the first time, build it up with a long-term vision, you get a product in. And I think, from our discussions and talking about the auto injector a bit further, obviously step one is get the product approved, get revenues, get it on the boards. Once it's there, you can do label expansions, hip, feet, hands, back, all the rest of it, other indications, and then obviously make it easier for people to then use the product in an at-home setting through an auto injector. So the penetration, obviously, from initial early adapters and people within the studies and markets will start to expand and grow as the awareness grows for the product. And in our view, it's always, our long-term vision is that it will become the, frontline standard treatment for any person with an inflammatory disease or cause, and primarily osteoarthritis being the largest. So, that's our long-term vision, and I'm glad that, the company's taking all the steps to mitigate risks, make it easier and more accessible to people, in using it, and it's a fantastic story. The one other thing I wanted to talk with you about, I guess in a bit of detail, was the disease modifying aspect of the drug, the 008 study that the company's going to embark upon very soon in Australia. Now, just maybe talk through what is that study, why is the company doing it, and why is it so important, not only for the economics of the product, but I guess for marketing and registration going forward, and also in terms of news flow for investors and what we can sort of expect to see in the coming year.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So yes, Para 008, I know most of your listeners won't understand the numbers of our clinical trials, but it's called internally our biomarker study. These are markers of disease progression or regression. And if we look at why it's important, again, let's go back to the bigger, longer term view, the strategy of doing something now rather than doing it later. So when we get to our discussion with the FDA after the phase 3 trial, assuming it's successful, we want to have a discussion about the label, the depth and breadth of the label. So we want to be able to say, look, this is being demonstrated to reduce the pain, improve the function in people with osteoarthritis. And we don't believe that we shouldn't add onto that the drug also slows the progression of the disease, which would then make it, like, as you say, frontline treatment, because as soon as people know that it's going to slow down the osteoarthritis, I mean, every person at the golf club is going to want to have a piece of this. Everyone who's walking their dog, everyone who's just sitting at home with chronic pain is going to say, well, I want to get the pain relief, I want to get improved function, but I want to stop this disease from getting worse. So,
you don't only want the pain relief while the effect of a opioid or a Panadol or anything that you're taking or an NSAID is actually in your system and working. You want it to be long-lasting, long-term. I don't want to have to keep taking these things every day.
Exactly. And with NSAIDs and opioids, they have a very short therapeutic window. So they might work for a few hours and then you've got to take them again. We believe with this drug that we can have a course of the drug, reduce those symptoms, but at the same time, really improve the health of the joint. So we believe that if we do this study now, when we get to that discussion with the agency post phase 3, we can incorporate that into our label. And that will then help us with the penetration rates and the marketability of the product once it's registered. So again, hopefully all of your listeners are aware that osteoarthritis, has a huge number, several 100 million people with clinically diagnosed osteoarthritis, 33 million people in the United States who at the moment have symptomatic relief products like over-the-counter analgesics or prescription opioids, or again, over-the-counter anti-inflammatories or prescription anti-inflammatories, and that's about it. They don't have any product.
It's not a new, it's been done in animals, but not done in humans. So, measuring the synovial fluid and the biomarkers that show the cartilage breakdown. In those previous papers, and what's the company seen from those learnings? And obviously you did some of it in the phase 2, but not from the joint specifically. What are you sort of expecting to see from the biomarkers, given what's happened in the preclinical setting and obviously in the animal sort of studies?
Sure. I'll just, if I could insert before the answer, Scott, just a definition for your listeners about a biomarker. So a biomarker is a biological indicator of disease progression or disease regression. So once you see this marker, you can then generally determine that the disease is progressing and the joint tissue is being destroyed. So one of the biomarkers would be Adams TS5, for example. Adams TS5 is an enzyme that is produced by cartilage cells when the conditions are such that the cartilage is receiving large amounts of inflammatory signals, infiltrating cells. It starts to produce and overproduce Adams TS5, and that starts chopping up the cartilage. So that's why you get the cartilage degradation. And Adams TS5 is probably one of 15 different enzymes that has chopping up cartilage or breaking down the proteoglycans. So once you detect these, you can then say, well, obviously this person has osteoarthritis, they've got the symptoms of it, but the biochemistry is such that they've got elevated Adams TS5, which means their cartilage is being broken down, as in the case of also C2C or CTX. These are other collagen, cartilage collagen breakdown fragments that you can then detect within the in the blood, or you can detect them from the actual symptomatic joint. So the symptomatic joint means that there is no confusion that those biomarkers are actually related to the disease in that joint. So with 008, we are looking to, if you like, in some cases, almost replicate the work that's already been done elsewhere in preclinical and clinical studies, where the doctor is going to take, at the start of the study, in each patient, a sample of their synovial fluid. So this is a needle into the knee and drawing up synovial fluid to measure the baseline levels of these biomarkers. And if the science is correct, then what we've been learning over the last 10 years is that these biomarkers in all of these subjects will be quite high because they have osteoarthritis. Therefore, these biomarkers will be at an elevated level. And then at the end of day 56, so they've had their treatment course, 2 weeks later, we take another sample of the synovial fluid, and then we take another sample at day 165. And then we chart out the results. And what we expect to see is that the high levels of the biomarkers in placebo will continue to rise at day 56 and continue to out to day 165. What we expect to see with pentazan is that those levels will start to come down at day 56 and be even further reduced down at day 165. That will then provide conclusive evidence that the drug is not only treating the symptoms, but it's also getting the cells within the joint that are currently geared to destruction to get them to switch from destruction to regeneration. And that was seen in a paper by a Japanese group where they took animals, they induced arthritis, and they gave the animals a comparator drug, a saline or pentazan, and then they measured the synovial fluid at different time points. And they showed that with pentazan, those biomarkers were decreasing. They also did follow-up histology and showed that some of the articular cartilage had regrown in those animals that received pentazan, and also showed that the rest of the joint, which is normally the synovial membrane, becoming very thick and inflamed with infiltrating cells, was back to normal, and the normal of infiltrating cells was at a level comparable to the control group that got saline.
So when is the readout of this primary endpoint?
So the primary endpoint reads out in Q3 this year. So we're very close to a very significant readout. So this will be 60 subjects randomized 1-to-1 with placebo. We'll be looking at the effect of the drug on the biomarkers and looking at the rate of reduction from baseline. And that will be our primary readout. But of course, we're also measuring the pain and function scores of these subjects. And that will read out as a total study in Q2 calendar year 2022. So that's even less than 12 months away before you've got a complete readout of a study before the phase 3 is complete. So from an investment point of view, you'd be looking at 008 saying, well, if they can show that the biomarkers are reduced, then they have the potential when they go to the agency to talk about disease modification, whether that be in the US or Europe. And then, of course, they have the opportunity to see what the pain and function scores are going to be before, even in a smaller sample, obviously, sample size. But at least you'll get an idea of what the pain scores are in 30 subjects treated with PPS versus placebo before the phase 3 reads out.
The secondary endpoints, being similar to what we'll see in the phase 3 IND, pivotal study, WOMAC reduction in pain, day 56.
Yes, so reduction in pain from baseline using WOMAC, pain score system, and the same mean change from baseline with the WOMAC function.
Yeah, I mean, and we've discussed a little bit. It's a different study in terms of needing to shove a needle into someone's knee to take fluid. So there could be other, impacts in terms of how people are, perceiving their pain or joint at the time. And it's obviously a smaller study, but I think given all the real world evidence that we've seen to date, and it's obviously not powered for statistical significance on those secondaries, but we would be hopefully seeing, a very strong trend in favour of what we'll see in the phase 3. And obviously with a larger patient population, the standard deviation should be a lot tighter and allow a much better, statistical significant result in the phase 3. But I mean, God forbid you actually hit a statistical significant result in this. It would be a pretty clear look through for the phase 3, in our opinion, as to what we'd see. So I'm hoping that we will see something along in that ballpark. But obviously, maybe to just touch on why the study's not powered for that, and yeah, the focus, I guess, going forward is more so on the disease modifying aspect of it.
Yeah, so you're right, Scott. So the flip around is to put the biomarkers as the primary endpoint here, so that we've got data to support discussions with the agencies over disease modification, and to also help with promotion and marketability of the product once it's registered. Again, if you go into a physician's office and say, we've got data to show you get symptomatic relief of pain, improvement in function, but we also got disease modification data, the doctor's going to be scrambling to write a script for, hundreds of patients who currently are not being well tolerated.
And I think
with other.
On that in more detail, how does, if we show disease modification, by later this year, how does that impact the commercial discussion with potential partners for distribution or pharmaceutical companies that may look to, further advance the osteo?
Yeah, huge, Scott. I mean, the other aspect to this is, of course, reimbursement. And if you've got disease modification, your reimbursement price goes up significantly. But commercial companies are currently following Paradigm. They're following our progress. We know that, and so they should. But if we got positive disease modification data, then it allows us to go to the big pharma companies and start talking transactions before we get to the end of phase 3, or it allows them to become very interested in what we're doing, because they too will be looking for a look through to a phase 3 outcome and looking to transact before the end of phase 3, knowing that if it's successful, then that price will go up significantly. So we would be seeing these data as critical for ongoing pharmaceutical transaction discussions.
In terms of the some of those other transactions that have happened in the anti-NGF, tanzimab, and all those sort of failed, I guess, indications that are now trying to, recoup some of the economics of spend. The deals that you saw there, what were the ranges there? It was, $2 billion plus US dollars for an asset well before a phase 3. They didn't have disease modifying aspects to the product as well. I mean, obviously it had a lot of adverse events. Just maybe talk to some of the differences there and just how you guys are thinking about the commercial aspects of those discussions and relative to what else is on the market, assuming, we can replicate what's been seen in the disease modifying components of the previous work.
Yeah, well, I think, like from a company's perspective, from Paradigm's perspective, they have to be seen as the bear case, if you like. That's the bottom line, several $1 billion for a transaction, because those products won't have the same penetration into the market if they are approved, because they have safety concerns and there are a number of other issues. So we believe that, if you're going to invest that amount of money in something which doesn't have the same safety profile or the efficacy profile of xylitol, then why wouldn't you be paying more for that as opposed to paying less? So that's if you like, it set a watermark for our company to say that that should be the base position, because companies can afford and obviously do transact at that level. This opportunity offers a lot more than the one that you mentioned. NGF, by the way, is very effective. It does block pain, but as you say, it has unfortunately resulted in some very significant side effects and adverse events, and they may not even get registered based on that side effect profile. They may get registered, but then it comes back to the question of, all right, you've got it registered, what's the take up in the market going to be? Because the doctors will then know that this doesn't have any disease modification, it only blocks pain, but it's a risk-benefit equation. So I think it would be much better to say, let's go to the market with a product that has a better safety profile and disease modification, and therefore the risk-benefit it's much more in favour of xylosine.
And we've got some evidence to show that we do, in fact, reduce the anti-NGF as well, in some respect.
Exactly. So we wanted to make sure that we understood the mechanism of action, which is again a key component to the IND document, where the agency says, all right, you've shown this clinical effect. Now point to the data to show us where and how this drug has that effect. So Catherine Stapleton and the University of Adelaide and our own Chief Scientific Officer, Ravi Krishnan, undertook a study investigating PPS and its ability to down-regulate the expression or the source of this nerve growth factor that is a pain mediator. You don't want to block it completely. That's when you get into the side effects, but you want to down-regulate the amount of NGF that is in the joint, and therefore docking on pain receptors. You want to reduce it down to normal levels. And that's what Pentazam was shown to do. So that has been peer-reviewed and published. And like most of our results to date, where we've got the data, we like to send it off for peer review and publish it, because it also gets on the radar of big pharma companies, but it also gives investors some insight that we are prepared to put the data out for peer review and publication.
So, and just talking about the publications, there's a few, I guess, that have got backlogged due to COVID that are now very close to coming out. Are we expecting to see some of those pretty soon?
Yes, I think we'll see some. We have currently about 3, maybe 4 publications in the pipeline. We have been tracking their progress weekly, and I think we're going to see some of them come out of that peer review publication process fairly soon. But again, investors should look at that and say, okay, well, that means things that the company's been saying about the drug have been peer reviewed and validated by independent people, that the data is in fact true and correct.
Paul, also, I think, talking about the 008 study and why the company, I guess, is doing it right the first time, one of the big and I guess very exciting opportunities is the TGA provisional approval and first revenues for the business. Now, obviously, companies can sell the product on the SaaS program. It doesn't allow you to market the product actively. It's very much up to the physician who's prescribing the drug. So a provisional approval allows you to market the product and potentially partner up with someone for distribution. Now, our understanding is that it takes around 255 working days, so call it a year from the submission. When is the company planning on pushing that submission through? And I guess what's the data that you're waiting for to then make those final cases to try and get the approval, which I think, from our prior talks, would allow the company first revenue about 2 years ahead of when you would if you waited for the phase 3 study to be completed and filed and registered.
Yeah, exactly, Scott, and thank you for that question. And look, the provisional approval through the TGA is a key priority for our company. It effectively means the product is registered and it can be sold as a therapeutic agent in Australia, which means that we then have the ability to sell and market and promote xylitol for osteoarthritis in Australia, should we get provisional approval. Now, we have met with the TGA, like we have met with the FDA and the EMA, and we have got feedback from them. And what they have asked us to demonstrate, and one of the other benefits of 008 is demonstrate to us that this is a serious therapeutic advance over current medication. So if we show them the data to show that it reduces pain and improves function, then the agency might say, well, look, we can point to quite a number of drugs that reduce pain, and then we can see another class of drugs and we can point to those and they can improve function. So where's the major therapeutic advance? So that's why 008 is one of the primary reasons that we're doing it is not only for the FDA for our label, but also for the TGA to say, well, here's our major therapeutic advance. Yes, we can point to drugs too that have a reduction in pain. And we know some anti-inflammatories improve function, but we can't point to any other drugs that actually reduce the progression of the disease. We can then point with this study to show this is placebo, the disease is on an upward trajectory, heading towards joint replacement. With Pentazan, however, we can see a plateau and a downturn in all of these markers demonstrating that it is a major therapeutic advance. So that's one of the major reasons for 008. As I said, it's also one of the other major reasons, reasons is the FDA label. And also the other thing which again becomes strategic in terms of our timing and planning is that the final component that the TGA is looking for is to say, show us your evidence that you will have a completed phase 3 clinical program within the 6-year period of 6 years from the provisional approval date. So we can then talk to the agency and say, look, 003, which is 002, which is our pivotal study, is already underway, first patient treated. We can also say that 003 is our confirmatory study, and that is well underway. And then we'll put all of those studies together, and then we'll have a clinical plan and a readout in Q1 calendar year 2024. So that the agency can then say, okay, well, if we give you provisional approval now, you'll clearly have a completed program by that time frame, with 6 years from provisional approval, and then you tick all the boxes. So they're the two major reasons for doing 008 now as part of our clinical development program.
And I guess the company's done a lot of work on pricing and things like that. And, we've got our own thoughts around that. But when how the progression going on in terms of those economics, and obviously it'll change based on some of these results, but these early sort of SaaS revenue cases, the company's, I guess, hopefully going to put out something soon in terms of when those treatments become available and people can actually pay to access it should they want to do that. Yeah,
so again, Jeannie with her team is looking, we have contracted with a pharmaceutical pricing provider that they do analysis of all of the things that we've been discussing and come up with what they think is a range of prices that the company would be able to support once the registration was approved. So that won't be complete until Q3, Q4 this calendar year. It's extensive research covering many different markets, looking at price sensitivities, what drives the price and things like that. But what we do know thus far is if it's just treatment of pain, it will be a much lower price than disease modification, hence the importance of 008. So at the moment, pricing of the final product will be well before we finish the phase 3 trial. So we'll know that. And we will obviously have all of that supporting data to talk to the agencies in terms of why we think that product is or how it's supported. And of course, all of the regulatory and reimbursement companies once the product is registered.
Yeah,
how we see that.
And I think one of the other things, obviously, it's not a one-trick pony with OA, and I don't want to go into too much depth on MPS and Ross River, but maybe just touch on those sort of indications and the plans on what the company's going to use there going forward. I believe Ross River is close as well in terms of access in Australia, which I think at the moment they're saying it's going to be one of the worst years for Ross River just due to the weather. Just talk to us maybe a bit more about those indications and where they're at.
Yes, that's an important point, Scott. That's why I really want to bang the desk and get investors very excited and understand that this company is not a one-trick pony. We do have other clinical programs ongoing, even while we talk about this, very comprehensive clinical development plan for OA. We also have a development plan for MPS, which is the genetic disorder, which is treated with enzyme replacement therapy, but enzyme replacement therapy doesn't help the joint and muscle pain for those subjects. So there is an opportunity to add PPS on top of enzyme replacement therapy and have adjunctive therapy, and an opportunity for an enzyme replacement therapy company to have a package of pharmaceuticals that can address the missing enzyme, but at the same time also address the pain and joint dysfunction. So we have already started a phase 2 open label study at the Women's and Children's Hospital in Adelaide, treating MPS 1 patients. So that has already recruited and treated 3 subjects, and we're looking to move to bringing other subjects from interstate now as part of that trial. MPS 6, we are working with Dr. Roberto Giuliani in Brazil, who has quite a large cohort of MPS 6 sufferers around in Brazil, somewhere upwards of 200 cases. So quite a unique situation for such a rare disease to have such a large number of subjects. And we're looking at doing a phase 2, phase 3 clinical study in Brazil in MPS 6. So the IND type of equivalent has gone into the Brazilian regulatory authorities, and we're waiting on feedback from that. And if successful, we'll be starting that phase 2, phase 3 study in Brazil this year. So lots of positive things happening in relation to that orphan indication. Bear in mind, MPS Paradigm has applied for orphan designation for both Europe and the US FDA and received that. So it is an orphan drug application, and that in itself presents a very interesting commercial opportunity. You mentioned about Ross River, and you're absolutely right, Scott, with the background on Ross River, but not a lot of people understand that Ross River causes very similar symptoms to osteoarthritis. It's viral arthritis in the chronic phase. So generally in the acute phase, people who've contracted alpha virus or Ross River from mosquitoes, in the acute phase, it feels more clinically, it feels more like a case of the flu, maybe, where you get increased temperature, sweats, general lethargy, aches and pains. But in some people, around 15% of all people infected with Ross River move into the chronic phase. And the chronic phase is very similar to osteoarthritis. This is where it tends to set up in particular joints. And we know that the virus gets into the synovium and it replicates and it persists for a long period of time. And unfortunately for subjects who've got that condition, there is no known treatment for that other than just respite and maybe some Panadol. And both are largely ineffective, and these people suffer for a long time and often go on to other conditions such as chronic fatigue and degenerative osteoarthritis. So we have conducted and finished back in 2019 a phase 2 pilot study, taking people in the chronic phase of the disease, injecting them with pentazan polysulfate, sodium, and studying from a number of different outcomes the effect of the drug on their symptoms. And what we showed was that there was very significant improvement in their symptoms, and also a higher percentage of the PPS treated group moving on to remission of their symptoms versus placebo. So very, very nice outcome, very nice study that was written up and submitted for publication back in 2019. So we haven't seen that yet published, but I believe that's imminent. But again, demonstrating what you said before about how the whole process of publication has really been slowed during the pandemic, with a lot of focus on articles relating to COVID.
Mm.
But in addition to that, we have in a preclinical setting, we have our heart failure studies moving along very nicely. We're about to commission the next range of preclinical studies there with a group in France, being overseen by the investigators in Norway. And we also have
You've got so many things going on, we can't even remember.
yeah. Thank you.
No, because we get so caught up looking at just one or two
Yes.
of the indications, and there's so many others. I mean, we talk about MPS, but there's so many lysosomal rare diseases that have similar symptoms that can be used.
Yeah.
And I think, in essence of time, while you and I can obviously talk about Paradigm for weeks and weeks and hours and hours, I guess people would like to probably just finish on some of the things that I like. Maybe just before we go onto that, just in terms of the there's been some changes and a lot of new hires for the company. What's sort of the plan from here? You're obviously the team's growing. I think when we met, it was you and a handful of people. Now there's much more infrastructure behind the company and people that are able to take on a lot of responsibility and burden. What's sort of the new hires that are coming, and I guess obviously the chairman and the few board changes that happened? How are those sort of things progressing, and where are they at? Just as a sort of.
Well, thanks, Scott. I just remembered acute respiratory distress syndrome. So ARDS. We're in preclinical studies with ARDS as well as heart failure. So you're right. We have a plethora of opportunities, and we do have an extensive pipeline. I must say, the preclinical studies are progressing and meeting all of our expectations at this point in time. So expect some more news on that this year as well. Yes, in terms of Paradigm's development, moving into becoming a phase 3 company, we realized that we needed to really expand our operation. So we, in terms of some of the new hires over the last 12 months or so, we have appointed Dr. Donna Skerritt, who's a physician coming from New York. Donna has prepared many IND submissions for many different compounds over the years. She's also been a principal investigator on many clinical trials. So she's acutely aware of what's required from a clinical trial perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective as well. So she's a substantial asset for us. In addition to that, we have Dr. Jeannie Jochen, who is our Chief Operating Officer. So Jeannie brings a lot of skills to the company. Jeannie's ex-CSL, so she has a very good business discipline of bringing all of the infrastructure that's required for project management on complex programs, also business development skills, and also the clin and regulatory background. Beverly Huttman, who's our head of commercial. Beverly's done a lot of work, again, ex-CSL, on financial models, sizing of markets, sourcing products such as the auto-injector, investigating pricing and sensitivity. Justin Cahill, as CFO, ex-CSL as well, has brought a lot of very substantial expertise to his position. We're looking at putting Forex coverage into place. So now that we're a larger organisation, we've set up bank accounts in the United States and also in Europe. so that we have registered addresses there for communications with regulatory authorities, but also a base for our company as we expand globally. And we also have a very core group of people who've been involved in many different regulatory submissions over the journey. Mel Dyker, as you know, Scott, we travelled with Mel. Mel has over, I think, 20 years experience with GSK, big pharma company. We also have Michelle Coffey and Dr. Carla Noah, who've both come out of a number of pharma companies such as Pfizer, Hospira, worked on many different regulatory submissions. So, we are developing up our regulatory department, so we have self-sufficiency there. We're developing up our clinical department, our operations and business. So the company is changing rapidly, and it really has moved into a company that will one day, hopefully, be a major pharmaceutical company with revenues coming in from an array of different applications and an array of different products.
And I think, from an outside investor's point of view, for us, seeing the quality of the hires and talking to them and understanding, their own, when the person moves jobs, they take a big risk, and leaving a well-known company like a CSL or a Pfizer or whoever, and moving to, I guess, a smaller biotechnology business like Paradigm. They take a lot of risk, and they need to look at what sort of upsides there, and talking to them and the data and the things that they've reviewed gives us a lot of, I guess, external confidence that, we can attract, we've got a great product and we can attract a great team. And, having a good management company or people running the business is vital to the success of these businesses. So it's a huge feat to attract these sort of quality names and also people to the board. And I believe, the chair search is still ongoing, and we'll find, more members of the board, which will hopefully be announced, I guess, this year, Paul.
Oh, yes. Yeah, definitely this year, Scott. Look, again...
I'm sorry.
Most of your, but I heard the existing chair is a really good bloke and doing a fantastic job. So I just...
You're a bit of a Superman, mate, doing everything.
Oh, no, I'm really enjoying the board work, to be very honest, Scott. It's an area that I think, is very important for our future development. And we have been working with the proxy advisors, making sure that we are doing all the things necessary to ensure that we, reach maximum compliance levels. And currently 9 out of 10, and we're hoping to get to 10 out of 10 and then sustain that. We do have a majority of non-executive directors on the board now. Previously, we didn't. Our chairman left July 2020, and it was very short notice. I didn't even know that at the time that was a possibility or decision that's going to be made. So I remember that day very well, waking up thinking today's going to be a good day, and read my emails and thought, okay, well, we've got some extra things on the to-do list. So I think reshaping the board is a passion of mine, and it will be done. And we are looking for, very good people who can add that compliance and that support to shareholders, that knowing that the business is being watched and managed very carefully, so that your investment is in very good hands. And I think investors should hopefully see that some of the recent changes with the bringing on the board of Amos Meltzer and also Helen Fisher. Helen's very well known in Melbourne and beyond as a very, very experienced board member, and she's already brought that to our first 2 meetings. She's a very intelligent lady and a very determined lady to make sure that everything's done properly. So I think investors should see that their investment is in very good hands.
Well, I think to finish up, Paul, I always love, and obviously the board drives the vision of the business and I guess overall direction. Where do you personally see the company in 10 years? Obviously, it's been a very long journey to get to where we are now, and it's kicked goals along the way. Where do you see it in 10 years' time, like on the long-term horizon? where's Paradigm?
Yes, look, I think from a very personal point of view, Scott, I hope in 10 years' time I can walk into a pharmacy with a script and give it to the pharmacist and get an auto-injector with xylosol and go home and treat my osteoarthritis and feel great about things. And that's my vision. Let's get a product on the market that is going to revolutionize the treatment and management of osteoarthritis worldwide. But and not to forget the other products in the pipeline, but like 10 years, I'm sure we'll have a product on the market. From my position, again, I would see and hope the Paradigm becomes a highly recognized, highly profitable pharmaceutical business that is well respected by our peers and also well respected by our investors, seeing a fantastic return on their investment and feeling very comfortable that the company is still going to grow year upon year as a real player within the global pharmaceutical industry.
And I think capped at circa $500 million or EV of $500 million with a decent cash balance. In 10 years' time, having a frontline product for an osteoarthritis indication, which is obviously very popular and very, very common, would be multiples higher than that, and where some of our prior, I guess, work and numbers and valuation metrics have sort of come from. But we do like to have that longer term vision and think that the business will be having multiple products on the market and very well recognised in 10 years. And we applaud the job you guys have done and all the management team, and we love talking to everyone and hearing how things are going. And we're very excited for 2021. 2020 was probably a bit of a bump in the road for a lot of things with COVID and all the rest of it. But I think as things start to return to normal and travel comes back on, Paradigm's got a very jam-packed pipeline this year, and we look forward to major re-ratings, hopefully in the share price as these catalysts unfold, and hopefully the way we think. Pretty simple. I think I've always said to you, it's the drug works and people want it. So hopefully that continues to play out over these next few years, and we look forward to being on the journey.
Exactly, Scott. And if you put those two together, a drug that people like and it works, then in an indication like osteoarthritis, you've got a blockbuster. And hopefully today's discussion, your listeners can get a sense of how we are embarking on a very comprehensive program, but we have got the resources internally to be able to manage that with our external suppliers, but also to understand that there is a rationale behind all of the things that we're doing, which is often focused in the future. And yes, it does seem like a very big program, but all of these pieces build a program that should go through the IND, through the NDA, and out into the market with a nice label, and then allowing the sales to flow and the profits to start to be booked by Paradigm, and they'd be very healthy because of the work that we're doing in 2020 and 2021.
I look forward to my dividends, Paul.
Yes. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks so much. And yeah, hopefully people found this worthwhile. And as I said, it was the first one. Talking about our investments is, I guess, a passion of ours, and we obviously do a lot of follow-up calls with yourselves and management teams all the time. So it's nice to be able to, I guess, share some of the things that we're looking at as a professional investor in one of our larger investments. So thanks again for taking the time, Paul.
Thank you very much, Scott, and thank you to all of your listeners.